one of the main reasons why I meditate is because what it creates is it creates a gap between stimulus and response. So if I'm driving down the road and somebody flips me off and cuts me off, and there's a potential for road rage, by being mindful and doing the right thing, what happens is I can wait a second or 2 seconds and realize, you know what, I don't need to respond to that, and I just keep driving. So meditation creates that space. It's wonderful. The mind slows down, and it creates a space allowing you to assess and become aware of what is really happening and how you need to be and react.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Sabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. I'm thrilled about our guest today. He's sports psychologist Dr. Jerry Lynch. He's the author of 11 books, the founder and director of The Way of Champions, a performance consulting group geared towards mastering the inner game for peak performance in athletes. He has over 35 years of experience as a sports psychologist, coach, athlete, teacher, and is also himself a parent of 4 athletic kids. He's worked with Olympic athletes, NBA athletes, NCAA champions, coaches, students, parents. Really wonderful mind to have on the show. And why he's going to be on our show today is not actually just because of his work with athletes. What's really fascinating to me is that so much of the work that he does has been heavily influenced not only by Western psychology and Western science, but by Eastern philosophy and thoughts. He incorporates a lot of work with Taoist practices, Buddhist practices, and ideas. So I'm really keen to get some of his insights that he shares with people about mindfulness and human performance and potential. As well, we'll even touch on parenting today. So really excited to have him on the show. Dr. Jerry Lynch, welcome.
Hi, I'm glad to be here, and this sounds like a wonderful way to spend my hour.
Excellent. So I wonder if you could fill us in a little bit on your background. What got you interested in sports science, and what brought you to do the work that you're doing today?
Well, the sport, as I mentioned to you earlier on in our conversation, sport is really a vehicle, something I use to help people understand the bigger lessons for the bigger game of life. And the reason why I chose sport, I mean, I could have chosen music, I could have chosen yoga, I could have chosen many different kinds of vehicles, but I've been a gym rat all my life. You know, I feel comfortable around athletes. I am an athlete. I relate to the struggle, the suffering, the sacrifice, the courage that it requires, the perseverance, the tenacity, the fight and the battle, which are all those wonderful spiritual virtues that I talk about in my work, and how to use those in life. And so when I started to see this connection between my love for sport and my love for philosophy and my love for living, and I saw the connection when I was able to apply Taoist teachings, Buddhist teachings, even Native American thought and tradition. When I saw that relevancy, it became an obvious journey for me to connect to other people and help them with those lessons for life through the vehicle of sport, which I knew so well, and I really understood it from a very deep spiritual sense. And I realized, everything I know about myself and everything I do and who I am is the result of making that connection from that vehicle of sport to all of life. And so here I am. I don't know how many years later. You said 35. I think it's a lot more than that. I think I started coaching and teaching 52 years ago.
Wow.
But I think my writing really starts to define my influence on an international level. Began 25 years ago, and I've just completed my 12th book and can't wait to start my next because I have so much more to express to people. So that's where I'm at right now.
Well, it's great. And you mentioned some of your books, and this was something that I'd like to share with our listeners, because when I was researching you for our conversation today, I recognized one of the names from your books, and I actually went and digging. I've got an extensive library, and I was going through my books in the Taoist section, and I saw one of your old books, Thinking Body, Dancing Mind. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've actually, and I mean, I bought this book back in the 90s when it was actually published, so I've had it for a very long time, and I was so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, I actually get to talk to this guy who, I've read his stuff from years and years and years ago, as well as his most recent book, which is, we'll get into that later, Let Them Play, The Power and Joy of Mindful Sports Parenting. So really excited.
That book that you had to blow the dust off, Thinking Body, Dancing Mind, is extremely relevant today, even though I think the publishing date on that was 1992. So we're looking at somewhere in the vicinity of 24, 25 years ago. Yeah. But I could have written that book today, and it would be a bestseller, just like it's been for me for the last 25 years. It's very, very relevant to our conversation, and I'm so thrilled that you could dig down deep and pull that book out. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, and I love so much of what you say, because I've been in martial arts and athletics my whole life, as well as yoga. And a lot of people, especially as a yoga teacher, when they find out that I've done MMA fighting and things like that, they're just like, oh my gosh, how do you reconcile those two things? And for me, sport and as well as martial arts has always been about self-exploration. You touched on it perfectly. You learn more about the diverse human experience in a short amount of time in activities like sport or like martial arts than some people learn in their whole lives. So I think it's so relevant to learn how to apply those in-the-moment lessons to the whole big picture of our life. And I really appreciate that perspective.
Well, Ashton, actually, for the listeners of our conversation, it becomes really obvious when you're mindful about the process of getting involved in something such as yoga or a martial art, for instance, or sport or dance or music, whatever it happens to be, that whatever the product is out there, like if you're on the mat with Aikido, the external is a mere reflection and extension of what's going on inside in your heart. And so your inner sense of self, how you feel about yourself and how you feel about life is always drawn on the mat. The picture becomes obvious. In sport, it's the same thing. When you're competing, your level of competing, or rather than your level, but how it appears. If you're doing the best you can, it's always a mere reflection of where your heart is and where your mind is. And if that's in disarray, well, then it doesn't look pretty on that mat. But if everything is where it needs to be, and you're being true to yourself, then what's reflected is that beauty inside, and that comes from a very strong commitment to being mindful. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And there's a quote in your book, in your most recent book, and you're talking about learning from your own mistakes in the realm of parenting athletes. And you wrote, I had good intentions, but exhibited poor behavior. And that kind of goes to that old saying of like the path to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think that clarifies too, though, the importance of mindfulness, because most of us in our own mind, we always think we're doing the right thing. So we kind of get a little blindsided, or we put on the tunnel vision for, we're not seeing the impact that those things are having. And I think that's really where mindfulness can affect not only athletes, but people as a whole. And I kind of want to get some insight from you of how really does that happen? How can mindfulness benefit everyone and not just athletes?
Well, let's just start with a real simple definition of mindfulness, because a lot of people, they don't know what we're talking about. I mean, what's mindfulness really mean? Does it mean full mind, empty mind, clear mind? To me, I kind of rely on John Kabat-Zinn's way of looking at mindfulness. He's written tremendous amount of stuff on mindfulness. And he says very simply, mindfulness is the state of being aware, of being awake. Well, another way of looking at it is you cannot be aware and awake if you're not in the moment, if you're not present. And in today's technological age where we have all these smartphones, which, by the way, I don't think are very smart, and there's a lack of communication. If you go to an airport, which I go to on a regular basis, you see everybody on their devices. They're not paying attention. They're not aware, and they're not awake of what's going on around them, whether it's just the energy that's happening or the beautiful sky. When you get on that plane, I'm looking out the window at the sunset and people are on their devices, and I purposely don't open any devices because there's so much to take in. And so let's start with that. Let's look at it. I would like people to think it's just a matter of let's be more aware. Let's be more awake. Let's be more aware of our children. Let's be more aware of our friends and our partners in the moment and ask, listen. That's one way of being mindful. So you listen, and then you understand by, how about asking some questions about what's going on now, and perhaps even validating people, saying, boy, that's a good point. I never thought of it that way. And is it a situation where we could learn from each other and learn from ourselves and just be with ourselves and be comfortable with that instead of going outside into some intergalactic bliss, or maybe go into cyberspace and try to see what's going on there. But it's a presence. It's a sense of being here now, as Ram Dass said many years ago in his wonderful book, Be Here Now. It's a way to come back to the time when people really did have eye contact and people really did listen and talk and validate each other and understand each other. Ironically enough, we're all trying to improve our lives, but it's not easy to improve our lives if we're not mindful of what's going on in our lives at the moment, so that we can make those leaps and take those steps to create a better life. And it all comes from a place of mindfulness. And if you look back, if every one of us look back on our best moments in life, when things really mattered the most, when we're really enjoying ourselves and having fun and feeling really good and happy, it's always in those moments when we are mindful. So when I see mindfulness, I see it as an entire life experience. And what I like to do is I like to go to sport and say, you know what? Too often I see athletes who are anything but mindful, and they're always wondering, how come my life isn't good? How come my sport isn't giving me anything? And how come I'm not getting anything out of this? And because you're too busy thinking about outcomes and results and what you're going to get. And so it changes. It changes everything. And it changes our relationship, not just to life, but to ourselves. And that might be scary for a lot of us to figure out how we're going to have a relationship with ourselves. But that's maybe a subject that we can skip for now. I don't know.
Well, one thing I want to touch on, because you had mentioned it, and I have a quote here from your book as well that talks about, you say, the key to successful goals is to remember never to measure your self-worth by outcomes. And you were talking about how a lot of your athletes get attached to their outcomes. Now, in the book, you talk about how important it is to stay more focused on concepts of diligent preparation and your work ethic. How does mindfulness tie into kind of more, because mindfulness could still be like, okay, well, just pay attention. Well, that's nice, and that sounds great, but how do we put it into action to be successful in the world and to achieve goals, whether they be spiritually oriented or sport oriented or materialistic oriented? How does someone apply some of these concepts into their life a little more?
Well, actually, it's simple, but it's not easy. I'll start by saying that. Yeah. The simplicity is overwhelming, and when you hear the simplicity, you start thinking, oh my God, why can't I do this? Well, the truth of it is you can, and we all know what to do. And basically, we know what to do if we stop and think about it, and we know how to do things. But can we be? Can we be present? Can we be courageous? Can we be mindful? And if you want to apply the concept, the notion of mindfulness to every day, what you've got to do is you've got, ironically enough, you've got to be mindful of being mindful. And maybe you have to get a 3x5 index card and write an affirmation, a statement that will make really clear what you need to do for the day. And maybe that statement is, I totally pay attention to what needs to be done in the moment. And then go out and find out what needs to be done, whether you're writing, whether you're sitting zazen meditating, whether you're doing yoga, whether it's me working with, last week I was at Harvard University working with a young, spirited group of 27 young men, Harvard soccer team. And we defined specifically what are the 7 essential absolutes that we need to be focusing in on when we're on the field in order to play well. And so once we defined those 7 absolutes, then it was a matter of saying, okay, now pay attention to those. Be aware and be awake to those 7. And let's see if we can go out on that field today and let's execute as many of those 7 that we can individually and collectively. So they went out and had one of the best practices they've ever had, because what they were doing was they were being mindful of the task that was at hand. Mm-hmm. So we individually have to define our task. Right now in this moment, my task is to be present with you, Ashton, to be genuine, to be authentic, to show up, to be seen, to have integrity, to be mindful that that's who I am and that's who I need to be right now in the moment, and listen to you and then respond to your questions and observe where the conversation goes. So my mindfulness practice, while I got up this morning and I sit and do my meditation, I am mindful at that moment of what my day is going to look like. And when I come into a task such as an interview, then my mindfulness is really helpful, because now all I have to do is say, Jerry, be aware of what your role is right now, and be aware that you're here as a servant to serve Ashton, to give to Ashton what he's looking for, so that he can turn around and give that to his listeners so that they too can be who they want to be. And so mindfulness requires being aware of being mindful. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, I love the idea too of things like index cards or little Post-it notes, little reminders to kind of stay accountable to doing it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because like on my desk right here, I have like 13 cards, and those cards are statements that remind me of how I need to be so that I can position myself for a life of happiness and wellness and to have good things happen. And if I don't write those cards, it might or might not happen, but if I write those cards and I read them every day and I remind myself, I'm increasing the probability of positioning myself for a wonderful day today than I would if I didn't remind myself. So it's like those cards become like coaching, like self-coaching, and they become your personal coach. And any one of us can write these cards. And in this book, Let Them Play, I really encourage parents who are working with their children to become more mindful of how they need to be, especially when they go to a soccer game or they show up at Little League, and they need to be present by not being on their cell phones. They need to be enjoying the game, and they also need to be quiet. They don't need to be talking to their kids all the time and giving them all kinds of ways they can be better athletes. All they need to do is say, I love watching you play, and watch the big smile on their kid's face, and then the kid goes out and performs at their best level. So I have all these reminders all around me, and I think the book becomes a big reminder for anyone who reads it. And the principles are solid. You know, they're principles that have been written and talked about for over 2,000 years. They're part of cultures like the Tao or Buddhist culture or the Native American culture that are still existing after all these years, and within a society that really totally makes sense. So we're just trying to make sense out of our life, I guess.
Absolutely. We're all doing just the best that we can in that front. In your book, you talk, one of the concepts you do talk about is a Buddhist concept of right action. It's one of the Eightfold Path that Buddha taught. And I'm wondering if you could explain to our listeners what right action means to you and how you apply it to people in your life, or how you apply it in your own life.
Well, you know, I think I guess I make an assumption here. Right action isn't a list of things you need to do to be acting correctly. Although what's interesting is in this book, I had the opportunity to write in part 4 a code of conduct, which really is from being in the trenches as a sports parent, but also as a professional. And when I'm in the trenches, meaning when I'm at a soccer game or a cross-country race or a basketball game, there's a certain code of conduct that's acceptable, which I would call right action. And so I offer that in the book. Generally speaking, though, let's just go to the bigger picture in life. I think most people, I would say, most of the population, we know right from wrong. We know what's right. We know what's not right. We know how to make something right. And sometimes we just don't take the time to be mindful and ask the question, what do I need to do and how do I need to be in this moment? If I ask that question, no matter what circumstance I'm in, the right answer shows up. The right action shows up. The right behavior shows up. So perhaps really what I'm teaching here is the more mindful we become of all circumstances that we're involved in, the more aware we are of what is going on, rather than leaving it to chance, then we increase the probability of positioning ourselves for good things to happen. We actually have, when we're more mindful, we have more of a say in the outcome because we're aware of what's going on. Then we can make choices and make decisions based on what we see is the right thing to do. So generally, there are people who maybe their ethics and their morality, maybe it needs a little sharpening here and there. But for the most part, I think most of us understand what right action is. If you want to take it to the baseball field, when you have a 12-year-old or 11-year-old out there on the baseball field and you have a parent screaming at the kid, put your elbow back, put your elbow back. And then you have the coach yelling, stand up straight, keep your head up, watch the ball. I mean, if people are yelling these things at me right now, like if somebody was right here when I'm talking with you and they're saying, Jerry, pull your arms back and watch your voice and all these directives, I would be a mess, I would be a total mess. So the right action is we have to be aware of where we are and what's really needed. And sometimes we need to be made known. We need to be told what that right action is. But I really do believe if we go back to the Buddhist philosophy of right action and the noble truths, really what I imagine Buddha would say is do the right thing, let them play, understand the circumstance, and ask yourself what would be the best thing. How what would be the best thing for me to do, and how should I be acting in this under these circumstances in order to make life a better place, in order to make the world a better place. And this comes from the heart as opposed to just reacting. And meditation is wonderful for many, many, many reasons. One of the main reasons why I meditate is because what it creates is it creates a gap between stimulus and response. So if I'm driving down the road and somebody flips me off and cuts me off, and there's a potential for road rage, by being mindful and doing the right thing, what happens is I can wait a second or 2 seconds and realize, you know what, I don't need to respond to that, and I just keep driving. So meditation creates that space. It's wonderful. The mind slows down, and it creates a space allowing you to assess and become aware of what is really happening and how you need to be and react. And all of us know that it doesn't really make life better if we flip that and try to catch up and speed up and flash our lights or maybe cut them off, and before you know it, we have a shooting and people die and all of that. We don't need to do that. So meditation, which is the path of mindfulness, what we do is we create that gap which allows us to pause, reflect, and act. And that whole process takes place maybe within 3 or 4 seconds, but that's huge. That's all we need, because most people's response is immediate to a stimulus. Mm-hmm. And then we're sorry. Oh, I wish I didn't do that, or I wish I took more time to think that through.
Yeah. In yoga, we call those some scars, or the impressions left from our previous experience, and they're layered into the subconscious, so it's just reactionary. And it's like you said, it's really nice to have that gap before the reaction, and that's response instead of reaction.
Yes, and meditation helps that. Absolutely. And I'm not saying we should all meditate, but the world would be a better place if we did. However, we don't need to meditate to get that gap. I think being mindful, being aware, write it on a card. Whatever area of your life you seem to be struggling with, and identify that area, and then write an affirmation about it that's positive and forward-moving, and see if that could help change it. It becomes a little coach or a little reminder. For instance, I decide to count to 5 before I react to any hostile environment and any hostile remark or whatever it happens to be. And if you remind yourself every day, and you do that for 3-4 weeks, it'll become part of you. In fact, that will be you. And you'll be a person who doesn't react as quickly as you used to. And so we all need help. We all need guides. I don't have any answers, but my observations, I think, are pretty astute. And I see this all the time with other people and also personally. I mean, the reason why I do this work is, I'm only halfway there, as the Buddha once said. I feel like there's just so much more to learn and so much more to develop, to experience life to its fullest, full capacity living. And mindfulness is a way to facilitate that journey.
Absolutely. And I want to steer a little bit of this conversation towards something that you say in your recent book, Let Them Play, because while I think that not all of our guests or our listeners are parents, I still think there's a lot to learn from the insights that you have, that you talk about in this book about mindful sport parenting. And, I have a daughter, she's 5 years old. She plays around with some sports. She's into dance and things like that. And I think there's plenty that applies even just to that realm of dance. But she's not really in that realm yet where there's any sort of, competition or anything like that. But I am looking forward to the future of like, this might be something that is definitely coming in. But yeah, you said something that I think, regardless of if you're a parent or even a coach of students, I think I have the feeling that your answer will give us some nice insight anyways. But you said parenting athletic children has the potential to be the most rewarding, mystical, spiritual experience of your life. And I'm wondering if you could explain why you think that is.
Well, you should go to the sentence before that too, where I say it's also the most difficult, demanding, challenging,
Yes.
Off the charts crazy, at times like unbearable. And then I say, however, it is this way, this wonderful experience. As a parent of 4 kids, there's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering that parents go through with their kids emotionally. Kids, I think I make a comment in this book. In fact, I probably make it right up front in the beginning, someplace, maybe there it is. I say I dedicate this book to my athletic kids, my Zen masters in residence, who taught me unsolicited, that's a key word, mindful lessons on the importance of being a good sports parent while I navigated the turbulent waters of youth athletics. The spiritual experience, the mystical experience is that, because of being a parent, I had to grow up. I had to really grow up. I had to really look at myself and understand what life really was all about, and how service is really one of my primary reasons for being on the earth, as it is for so many of us. And you have to serve these kids at 3:00 in the morning when they're screaming and they're sick and they're vomiting and whatever is going on, and you've got to be there. If you're in an ashram or some holy place, it's easy. You don't have to get up for meditation at 5:00 in the morning. You could sleep in, and no one's going to yell at you. But the kids are going to scream until you give them attention. So all of this work of parenting gives me the opportunity to learn these lessons, these spiritual lessons, and that's why I call them my Zen masters. And the satisfying part of that is without children, I don't know if I would have ever grown up to feel the full extension of life and to be as evolved as I am. Now, I need to clarify something here. Having said that, I'm perfectly aware that a lot of people listening to this interview are not parents, to whom I say congratulations. I mean, fantastic. I mean, assuming you made that choice. I think a lot of people are having kids. They're not making a choice. They think that's what they should do because they're married or whatever it is, and that's what they should have. They should have kids, right, and complete their life. And they're the worst parents in the world. I happen to want kids with my wife. We made that conscious decision. But I'll tell you, if I didn't want kids, it's not a good idea to have them. So for all of you who don't have kids, I want to congratulate you on making a wise decision. And at the same time, your growth spiritually will take place with other people and other kids and other human beings and other circumstances. So we're all in this world together, and the world is going to give us what we need in order to grow and become fulfilled and live to a nice old age and be full human capacity living is what I talk about all the time. And so you can get it through kids, you can get it without kids. But just for me, I am so grateful that I've had the opportunity to learn what I have learned through these Zen masters who just were relentless and wouldn't give up, forcing me to learn all of these wonderful, valuable lessons, which, by the way, at the time I did not want. They were not solicited by me. I thought I was perfectly fine without them.
Well, it's interesting to add to your comment as well. My daughter was an unexpected or unplanned pregnancy, and so it wasn't like, hey, let's have kids right now. But it is transformed to the most powerful experience of my life, without a doubt, for the reasons that you've talked about already. Because I'm stepping into it with mindfulness in mind of okay, how is this experience teaching me? And as a yoga teacher, I see my child as the great yoga. I mean, if you want to talk about masters of presence and mindfulness, find a 4-year-old. Find a 5-year-old, because they're not concerned about what just happened in that meeting an hour ago. They don't care what work you have to do tomorrow. They want you to be present with them right then, right now. And if you're not, they will let you know with their whole body and being. So it's this amazing mirror of presence and mindfulness to have children, which, again, not everyone has children. That's okay. And you can do the same thing with everyone in your life. But kind of as you said, in life, you can sleep in a little bit more. When you have children, there's no more sleeping in. Like you have children to take care of. So it's a constant reminder and a constant practice.
It's constant. They're demanding your attention, and they need you to be there. And if you're not, you'll fail. And if you are, you'll succeed. And to me, with all of these books I've written, 12 books, all these national championship teams I've been part of, and all the great work that I seem to be able to do and keep doing, that work means nothing if I failed as a parent, because that work was indeed the most important work for me to ever do. And if I could add this to the conversation, Ashton, 4-year-old girls, I mean, how precious is that? And when they get to be teenagers, give me a call back and we'll have another talk.
Oh, yeah. Most definitely.
Let me just say, it gets very interesting, and I'm being euphemistic about that. It gets really difficult, really challenging, and they'll challenge you, and that'll be like your graduate school. It's like going to get a doctorate in emotional, spiritual development. And fortunately for you, because of your background, because you meditate and you do yoga and you're present and you're very aware of these things, it will make it a lot easier for you. And that brings us full circle. And that's why I wrote this book, because I want to make it easier for parents. Mindful parents have an easier time of it, but it's still difficult. It's still challenging. But with a mindfulness approach that I use and let them play, with that approach, it'll be a lot easier, and the development and the growth that you experience will be exponential. And that's what I want for parents. I want them to feel empowered. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel the joy and the power of being a sports parent. Now, just an aside, even though this book obviously says the power and joy of mindful sports parenting, don't let that fool you. If you are a coach, it's a book to read. If you are a clergyman or woman in a religious organization, this is definitely a book to read. If you're a leader of any kind, you could be in a corporate world, this will give you joy and power of being more mindful with those people who you work with. So in this case, we're talking about working with children, but ultimately everything I say in this book, you could apply to any people that you work with. If you find yourself in a leadership role, a role where you are guiding, mentoring, directing, being present for people, this book's going to help you. There's no question.
Absolutely. And I can say that too. I mean, I'm, having my daughter who's not in sports yet, I still got a lot from the book, reading from it, because of, in particular, I mean, you're adding ideas of Western psychology and everything, but because it is so layered with these ideas and practices of mindfulness and Eastern thought from Taoism and Buddhism, you really tie things in that are applicable to all aspects of life. I mean, it's like, picking up the art of war and recognizing, well, this applies to everything in life, not just war strategy. So in the same way, and I noticed that with your other book that I've read as well. I mean, it applies to so many aspects of life, because what you're talking about truly, you've mentioned this already, is life. You're talking about through the veil of sports, perhaps in this particular case, but it applies to everything that we're doing.
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned The Art of War, because I think the book before this, or maybe the one before that, I don't know, it's called The Way of the Champion. People start thinking, well, champion, I'm not an athlete, so I'll never be a champion. That's not true. My wife is a champion because I watched her give childbirth. I watched her give birth to a child, to 4 children, and what she went through and how she handled that was championship-like behavior. In any aspect of your life, you can go about it as a champion, which means be mindful in the moment, be present, and do the best you can to be the best you can be. That's being a champion. And in that book, The Way of the Champion, I could also have named that The Way of Life. And what it is, it's a translation. It's written with one of my partners, Al Wang, who's Chinese. He translated The Art of War, and then I took his translation and applied it to the venue of sports as a vehicle for all of life. So it's fascinating to make these, for me, one of the joys that I have, Ashton, is to take these sometimes relatively obscure words and concepts written 2,000 or more years ago, and instead of people saying, well, what does that mean and how do I apply that? What I do is I say, this is what it means and this is how you can apply it. So my books are very practical oriented. So I have it's like practical spirituality, putting it into practice. Spirituality practiced specifically through sport, but put sport aside and say, you know what? This book can help me in business. This book helps me in life. In fact, that book that you referred to early, Thinking Body, Dancing Mind, I think the subtitle has something, does it not?
For extraordinary performance in athletics, business, and life. So yes.
And life. There we go. Right. Business and life. And the bigger game, the more important game. And that's what we're all about. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And
well, and I love that because that's a big part of what we do on the podcast as well. We're really concerned not with just these big lofty ideas, but how do you make them applicable to your life? Like, cool, some guy said this 1,000 years ago. What the hell does that have to do with me? And how can I integrate it into my life? So I love that you're doing that in the work. And interestingly enough, my final question for today, you just answered anyways, in terms of this idea that a champion is more than someone in athletics, that you can be a champion of life. And it really just means reaching your peak potential and kind of getting through that through practices like mindfulness and just being more present in your life. As you said, kind of asking, how can I show up the most in this moment? So I really, really appreciative of your insights and the work that you do. Where can our listeners find out more about your work? What's the best way to look and get your books? Where can we find out about that stuff?
Well, I think the first step, Ashton, would be if I'm listening to this conversation and I want to know more and go further, go to my website. It's very interactive. It's very dynamic. There's a lot of free videos, all kinds of things that I've written for nothing. You can just read them and enjoy them. And that website is www.wayofchampions.com. And also, if you want to shoot me off an email, you can shoot me off an email. And that address is wayofchampions@gmail.com. And just reference, when you write to me, just reference this conversation that we've been having. And I always get back to somebody. I'll always have a comment. And even if there's 5,000 people that write to me, I'll find a way, because my work in life is not to make a living. My work in life is to make a difference. And if you're that interested and you're that concerned and I can make a difference, by all means, I will do so. Anyway, enjoy the website because it has a listing of all the books with synopses of all the books. It has video. It has my DVDs, my CDs. It explains what's on there and how to order them if you wish. And this new book, Let Them Play, just came out this month, and it's available on Amazon. I don't have it up on my website yet. It's just too soon. It will take me another 4 or 5 weeks before I get someone to get it on there. And enjoy the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the work that you do. Thanks for our conversation today. I really appreciate your insights, and I love your openness and willingness to work with other people and to share. So thank you for that. I'm sure our listeners got a lot from the conversation today. I hope everyone has a very present and mindful moment. Thanks for listening. Namaste. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the show today. Please go over to iTunes, write a review, let us know what you think. It helps us in creating new content for all of you. It also helps new listeners get a sense of what to expect from the show. We really appreciate your feedback. Thanks again for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.